Today I'm looking at another budget Fi earphone, this time the TRN v90, for which I paid £25 for these from AliExpress, and that would be about $30 in US money. That puts them at around about the same price as the Blon BL-03, an earphone that doesn't particularly excel at anything, and yet for the price doesn't do anything particularly wrong either, and has become the go-to earphone for $30. Now, the TRN v90 has been around a little bit longer, but I've only just picked these up myself. I've yet to hear an earphone for this price that I like more than the Blon BL-03. So, does the TRN v90 topple the Blon? Well, let's get into it. Hey guys, this is Noel, and this is Wheezy Reviews, and each week I take a look at something audio related and let you know what I think. So if you're into that kind of thing, then make sure you subscribe. Now, the TRN v90 is a hybrid design IEM featuring a single 10mm dynamic driver and 4 balanced armatures per earpiece. That's 5 drivers per ear for $30. That's pretty impressive. The v90 uses 2 of those balanced armatures for the mid frequencies and the other 2 handling the treble frequencies. The dynamic driver, of course, handles the bass frequencies. Now, this is all rather impressive sounding, but it's the crossover and tuning that will decide whether this technology actually sounds any good. The physical construction is also rather impressive for the price. The body shell is made of CNC machined aluminium, although the nozzle is plastic and they use a metal filter. The weight is 6 grams per ear without tips, and they also come in 3 different colorways. So you have gunmetal, black, and this midnight blue that I have here, which I think looks really nice. Also note that they have these 2 large vent holes on the outside. They're a fair bit bigger than the usual pinhole vents on most IEMs. These vents don't seem to affect isolation all that much, but they do seem rather average for isolation. The cable connection method is a 2-pin connector with 0.75mm pins using the standard non-recessed design. Now, there's nothing wrong with this design, but actually I think I prefer the recessed C-pin design that KZ uses. The stock cable is the standard budget Fi affair that uses a rather thin and easily tangled cable with some rather stiff ear hooks. I did pick up an upgraded cable from TRN with this, which is of similar design, but it's a bit of a thicker cable. It's a bit more flexible, a bit softer. The ear hooks are still... Actually, the ear hooks are a little bit better. They're a lot better. And this one also has a chin bead that the original one doesn't have, although it is quite a loose bead and it doesn't really stay in place particularly well. Oh well, you can't win them all, so it seems that when you buy any of these budget Fi earphones, you do really need to upgrade the cables, so this is par for the course. Regardless, with a standard 2-pin connector, there are plenty of upgrade options available out there. The TRN v90 also comes with the standard 3 pairs of silicone tips in small, medium and large, and these ones are a touch nicer than the usual basic budget Fi tips. But as usual, I didn't get on with them. They wouldn't stay in my ears, and thankfully, the store that I purchased them from included 4 pairs of foam tips with them, and I did all of my listening using those foam tips. Something I want to note is the box that they come in is the usual KZ style box, which is also the same box used by QKZ. I wonder, do they buy all of their boxes from the same supplier, or who ultimately is the original design manufacturer of these earphones? Now, I don't know. I previously noted how the QKZ VK1 uses the same KZ style box and the body shell of the TRN V10. Now, all these 3 companies have different addresses. It's not clear how, if at all, they're related to each other. Who knows? Maybe someone knows? Leave that down in the comments. In terms of how easy they are to drive, they're super sensitive at 22 ohms impedance and 110 dB SPL. And just like the KZ ZSM Pro I reviewed a few weeks ago, I could barely turn up my headphone amp before they were way too loud. Now let's move on to the sound section, and a quick disclaimer that budget Fi earphones are often known for unit variance, and that might be the case with the TRN v90, although I didn't find much chatter online about this, but this is my experience with this one specific pair of v90s. And I should also state that all listening was done with the foam tips rather than the stock silicons, because as usual, I really struggle to get a good fit with the stock silicon tips, and I just don't get on with silicon tips at all. Now, all listening was done with lossless sources, some from my PC via an O2 amp, some via my phone, and some through the FIO BTR3. Now, I'm rather conflicted about how these earphones sound, and if not for their price, I would probably be judging them really quite harshly. During my testing, I found myself in a kind of a love-hate relationship with them, and I think that's probably fine for the price. They do seem to be rather track dependent rather than better for one genre or another, and I'll explain more as we go along. So let's move on. Now, the first thing, staging isn't bad, and I mean it's not great, but it's not bad, at least not for music. Now, maybe it's those big vents on the back, and perhaps they act more like an open headphone, I don't know, but they definitely sound pretty good for an IEM. However, whilst they don't sound narrow, they also don't sound particularly open, and I think that's more about their overall frequency response. Imaging is also not particularly special, and I know that no one is really going to game with these, but I gave it a go, and all I can say is don't. Again, I don't think that's a particularly valid test for an earphone like this. I was just curious, and I think that the sound signature just leaves them sounding too hollow for games. And in terms of the overall sound signature, it is very bassy and also bright. This is actually a really V-shaped sound. So bass is a fair bit more elevated than on the TRN, but it seems focused more on the sub-bass than mid or upper bass. There is a really impressive amount of extension with these. Although not the most articulate, they do have a decent amount of slam capability and a good fullness that doesn't seem overly boosted and bloated. Unfortunately, at times they sound a little bit muted and inarticulate for genres with more technical bass lines. Charles Mingus was almost missing on Better Get It in Your Soul, although a little bit more present in Moanin'. However, that track could be a little bit busy on the V90. Particularly considering how good this track sounds on the TRN is a bit disappointing. However, jazz is not really the forte of V-shaped earphones, and also let's keep in mind that their price. And for EDM, stuff like Deadmau5 and Asterix, actually the bass has a really good authority and a rather enjoyable impact to the kick. I think for more modern genres, the TRN V90's bass is simply excellent and really enjoyable, and that they aren't the most articulate is entirely forgivable for this price point. And in terms of comparisons to the Blon BL-03, the TRN V90 has a bit more sub-bass extension, and the Blon a bit more mid to upper bass and low mid energy. So whilst the Blon BL-03 has this rather warm low end, the V90 is the most V-shaped earphone I think I've tried to date. Onto mids, and despite the overall very V-shaped sound signature, I don't think the mids sound overly recessed, and I think this is quite track dependent. Mostly male vocals, toms, snares for example, they all sit quite well in the mix without being too far back. They're not particularly forwards, they're just right in the mix, and that's going to be a personal preference thing. However, upper mids are much more prominent and really quite forwards. Now, some people might find the TRN V90 a little bit hollow, but when V-shaped is done right, I don't personally see that as hollow, but more of a preference thing. It's another flavor versus a more neutral headphone. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as the balance is right. And I think with the TRN V90, the balance is almost right. It's definitely better than the KZ ZSN Pro. And versus the Blon BL-03, which for example is a slightly less V-shaped earphone, the lower mids on the V90 are a little bit more prominent, or at least clearer in the mix. Now, I think this is because the Blon suffers from a more boosted and warmer upper bass and low mids that unfortunately can lean towards muddiness, and the TRN V90 doesn't suffer from this at all. However, there is a lot more shout in the upper mids than on both the TRN and the Blon BL-03, especially between around 2 kHz to 5 kHz region. Actually, I think the TRN has a bit more energy at 5 kHz than the V90, but the V90 has a lot more energy between around 2 and 4 kHz. And for many genres, actually this is really too much for my tastes. Now contrast this with the Blon BL-03, which is actually quite restrained here, and the V90 are sounding like a much more aggressive sounding earphone. Aggressive can be fine if you want something that sounds more energetic, or if it comes with a significant level of analytical detail. Unfortunately, that is not especially true with the V90. Now sure, they are much more detailed than the Blon BL-03, which really is a low bar to pass in all fairness, but they are not a patch on the T4, which I suppose is not really all that fair a comparison considering the price differences. But unfortunately, these do lean towards grain, harshness, and edginess. Again, factoring in the price, the technical ability isn't so bad, but that upper mid shout is going to be the real decider for most people. For older music, such as jazz, classic rock, and pop, for example, all suffer from this edginess. Having said that, for modern genres such as rock, EDM, pop, and hip-hop, this upper mid shout is much less noticeable, and it is offset by the huge and impactful bass which gives so much energy to the music. Now for example, Better Get It In Your Soul by Charles Mingus, the drum kit, at least the toms, snares and hats, are nicely present in the middle of the mix, without being too forwards or too recessed. The brass is also right there in a musical sweet spot, but the alto sax is really quite edgy, harsh and shrill. It's not the worst reproduction I've heard of this track, but it's not particularly enjoyable either. But on Deep Jungle Walk by Asterix, this is a hugely impactful and energetic bass, and the TRN V90 is really doing this justice. There are a few moments where the upper frequency psychedelic synth parts are bordering on hush, but they are somewhat offset by the massive bass. I suppose that's that V-shaped balance for you. And on Hello by Adele, which is actually not really my usual cup of tea, but wow, pretty good. The piano has a nice big warmth, which sounds pretty natural. Adele's vocals have this surprisingly smooth quality, really smooth actually, and when the chorus kicks in, the big bass is offset by Adele's vocals with an excellent level of musicality, and I was really impressed. Am I an Adele fan now? Maybe not, but if this was my kind of music, I'd be very happy with the TRN V90. Now, just because I said they work well for modern genres, that doesn't mean we get away from that upper mid shout. Now, case in point is Automaton by Jamiroquai, which is not the most forgiving track for a shouty earphone or headphone, and that holds true with the TRN V90. It's not a particularly pleasant experience at all. Now, the treble seemed a little bit more restrained on the whole, and perhaps that is due to the excess energy in the upper mids to low treble. The treble seems rather tame in comparison. However, whilst the treble does roll off a little bit after that 2 to 5 kHz shoutiness, it still has a decent amount of extension and is actually quite smooth. In terms of overall detail, they are quite average. There are moments of brilliance and moments of subpar performance, and I suppose that is to be expected for their price. And actually, they do a much better job than the Blon BL-03. Again, modern genres are fine, but older or more technical genres will highlight the flaws pretty quickly. Now, I went backwards and forwards with these earphones, loving them and the bass performance 1 minute, and then recoiling in horror at the upper mid shout the next. And I was really quite unsure how I felt about them. But I had to have a good think about the price and think about the sound signature and the type of music that tends to pair well with. And actually, let's be real here. This is a V-shaped sound signature, and that does limit them somewhat. A V-shaped sound signature is really not the most versatile. So it's a budget earphone and struggles in terms of technical performance, but that's okay. So let's rule out older, well-recorded or audiophile music and talk about casual musical enjoyment for modern genres. And on the whole, I actually quite like the TRN V90. They have an energy and excitement to them, along with an acceptable level of detail for modern genres. These are certainly a fun-sounding earphone, but they do border on aggressive at times. Especially anything with a lot of energy in that 2 kHz to 4 kHz region, that's going to sound rather harsh and edgy, especially if it doesn't also have a lot of bass. At that point, it's going to sound quite one-sided and unbalanced with that upper mid emphasis. But match these with more casual and bassy genres, and they do a really good job. Just don't go expecting miracles, and as well you shouldn't for $30. Are they a good alternative to the Blon BL-03? Perhaps, but the Blon are definitely a more relaxed sounding earphone. Their lack of technical ability also rules them out for anything but casual modern genres. However, perhaps within their limitations, they are a more forgiving earphone, and therefore perhaps a more versatile one too. I'm not sure I could say which is better, the Blon BL-03 or the TRN v90 for $30, as both have their strengths and weaknesses. But I'd say, if you want a more energetic and aggressive earphone with an excellent bass and a bit more detail, albeit one that's slightly less versatile, then I would go for the V90. And if you want a warmer and more relaxed earphone, then get the Blon BL-03. Right, so that's going to be it then. If you like this video, then don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't already, then please consider subscribing. And if you like what I'm doing and you want to support the channel, then check the links down in the description. I'm on Patreon now, and join at any tier and get access to the Discord, or join at the $5 tier or above and get your name over here alongside these legends. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.